Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this TA Tech Leadership Summit on AI and machine learning in talent acquisition. As I noted just prior to the last intermission, unfortunately, our speaker for this particular session, Tom Kenny, who is the head of AI for the U.S. Army Special Operations Forces and the former CEO of Smashfly, has come down ill, and we certainly wish him a speedy recovery. And into the breach has stepped a very good friend of TA Tech's, a former member of our board of advisors, and somebody with the uncanny ability to talk about very complex topics and make it understandable by just about everyone. And that's Terry Baker, the CEO of PandoLogic. Terry, welcome.
Hi there. Hi, Peter. How are you? Happy to
Uh,
step in today.
well, we really appreciate your doing that. Why don't we begin by having you just tell us a little bit about how you personally got into the talent acquisition space, the technology part of that space, and what PandoLogic is and what kind of products it offers.
Yeah, well, I have some interesting distinctions as to when I first got into talent acquisition. I've always been in the software, high tech business, and I aligned with an AI-based company actually when the internet was first just taking off. And one of the things I did was built some sourcing bots to go engage talent off of news groups, right? In the early days, people were forming news groups online. And so I created these bots and they were going out pinging people on news groups and trying to engage them. And one of them was this little group called Craigslist. And I hadn't heard of it, but Craig didn't take kindly to it. I got a cease and desist letter from Craig saying AI bots aren't meant for his list. So that was my introduction in terms of trying to understand the application of AI in talent acquisition. And 20 years later, I had the privilege actually of talking to Craig about that. He remembered those early days. And today we're a big partner of Craigslist. So it's come full circle. Took 20 years. But
Well,
PandoLogic is forging AI and delivering new AI capabilities in the world of programmatic recruitment advertising. So we're kind of on the leading edge of that. And we're helping bring new capabilities to support recruiters in their efforts in talent acquisition.
well, I know we're going to talk about AI and recruitment advertising more broadly, but first, Uh, just just to sort of add a little controversy here to an otherwise bland technology discussion, let's take up the topic that Tom Kenny was going to talk about, and that is what will be the impact of AI on the recruiting profession down the road? Well, what is it today, and then prospectively, what is it down the road?
Yeah, sure. And first, let me just throw out my thoughts and prayers for Tom. I hope he is doing well. And Tom, those are big shoes to fill today. So I hope we do you proud. The topic of will AI empower humans or replace them is a provocative question. But when you think about it, talent acquisition, it's a people based, human based business. So the thought of using AI to replace humans in a human based process is a hard scenario to envision, right? I can't think of too many scenarios under which humans in talent acquisition are completely replaced, especially when you assume that the scope of talent acquisition isn't just the practitioners, not just the recruiters, it also includes the job seekers as well. So how does AI instruct, inform, engage, attract, job seekers and make that completely an automated process? Because last time I checked, job seekers still have free will, right? So that probably will never happen. But there will be some situations and scenarios under which humans will be replaced in different portions of the process, right? There are manual tasks, there are things that slow down the TA process that AI-based technology can simply do a better, faster job. And so that's where we're focusing, our efforts to help empower humans, and in particularly recruiters, in the attraction process and candidate delivery.
Well, as you know, since you've heard me speak, I have a somewhat different perspective,
Mm,
not for the near term. I think you're absolutely right. Probably for the careers of everybody listening to this particular session. But I think we do have to be honest with ourselves about what's likely to happen down the road. And I think there are two ways to look at it. The first is that there's no doubt that AI is taking on more and more of the tasks that humans perform in a wide range of occupations. I mean, there is the study using US Federal Reserve data out of Oxford University, which found that today AI has the capability to perform 47% of all human tasks in virtually every profession, craft, and trade. Uh, but the reality is that as AI begins to replace journalists, which it already has, and lawyers, which it already has, and even surgeons, and a whole range of other occupations, companies are going to be recruiting for fewer people. So the impact of AI on the talent acquisition function may not be direct in the sense that it's not replacing recruiters, but it may have a secondary or ancillary impact because companies just aren't going to be hiring as many people because AI has replaced other jobs. So I think there's certainly that prospect. And then the other is I just have a hard time buying into the creative destruction argument that AI is going to behave like previous technologies coming into the workplace, that not only does it destroy jobs, but it creates new jobs. That's certainly been true in the industrial era. Maybe it's been true in the information era. But I think in the automation era, there's something else afoot here. And that is that the pace of AI development, the growth in its capabilities is accelerating over time. And if you buy that there is going to be some point in time called the technological singularity when machines are just going to become smarter than we are, we will have created something that is smarter than we humans. Then I think you have to ask yourself, do we have the capability to train people for the new jobs? I mean, by the time and nobody thinks transition is easy, by the time we get people who are laid off into an educational program to reskill them for the new jobs, the pace of AI development will have proceeded so fast that the new jobs for which they're training will become the old jobs that are now being destroyed, and some other new jobs are going to be created, and that will go on and on and on until the point where we humans are just unable to keep up. We can't reskill ourselves fast enough to enter these new jobs. And the reality is that it is not creating the same number of new jobs as the number of old jobs that were destroyed. So to me, I mean, I'm not trying to paint some sort of, dystopian a picture of the future. But what I do think we have to do is think about the ramifications of this technology. We have to think about what is this going to do for our kids and grandkids, and prepare for the fact that we will live in a world where many, many, many tasks that are currently embedded in jobs are automated and done by machines that are smarter than we are.
Yeah, I recall sitting through Titanicity presentation in Austin when we used to go to conferences, right? And
Yeah, back in the day.
back in the day, and that was thought provoking for sure. And and in another TA Tech conference in Portugal, I sat across from Tengai, the automated robot recruiter, right, and had a conversation with a robot about recruiting. So it's happening. But the same extent that AI may be, in fact, displacing people, changing the way in which they work, AI can also educate. And so I hope one of the things we can talk about is the byproduct of AI in the production of data that can be used to train people quicker and better. right? So you talk about this gap of if you get displaced, how quickly can you come back and be retrained to do something else? AI will aid that as well. So I think you can come full circle, on this topic. But ultimately, it is a human business. And when you think about the recruiter, the best recruiters I've ever met are, in fact, the best salespeople I've ever met. Recruiters sell both the candidate and they sell the hiring manager and they sell the employer on who they think is the best qualified candidate for a particular job. That sales expertise is a little bit hard to automate in an AI environment. You can give them a lot of data that will help them make a better and more informed decision, but it still has to be sold. And there's a selling aspect that's highly innate, highly personal, that is very hard to displace. The other part of it that I think will be harder at some point in time to displace is the governing. Somebody needs to govern the AI processes to ensure they stay on the rails, to ensure that they meet the objectives and they do so without unintended consequences. And that's a term you'll hear a lot about in the use of AI, is unintended consequences, right? Which happen today. So I think the governance is an area that it will be important, particularly when the product you're dealing with is people and the placement of people. Unintended consequences is not something you want to have that actually impacts people. So those are my initial thoughts on it. We're very much focused just on kind of the immediate application
Right.
of it to empower people, not to displace, right?
Well, fair enough. And as I say, I don't want to turn this conference or this session into some sort of dark dystopian picture. So let's talk about the here and now. How has, in your view, how has AI benefited talent acquisition organizations, especially in the recruitment advertising area?
Well, there's in recruitment advertising, there's a lot of waste. And the old adage, 50% of my advertising spend is waste. I just don't know what 50%. AI can identify where that waste occurs. And one of the things that we have found is there's a lot of waste in AI because only a portion in the advertising, because only a portion of the spend is being done in an automated fashion. There's still a lot of human decisioning that's being used in recruitment advertising. And so to the extent that you can eliminate and automate decisioning and do it smarter through, algorithms, big data, smart data, then you're eliminating that waste. So we're seeing that in quite dramatic fashion for recruitment advertising when you take an old model and you displace it with a programmatic model that has AI constructs built in. So some of those AI constructs include, the ability to predict where the optimal budget ought to be and what the optimal yield should be given a recruitment campaign. If you're trying to hire certain types of workers, then the programmatic platform should be able to give you, before you spend money, should be able to give you a pretty good prediction as to what the optimal budget should be and what the yield for that budget should be. Most programmatic systems don't do that today because they don't operate on predictive data and have algorithms that can look at a hiring plan and translate that into an outcome. So that's one of the areas we're having a positive impact on recruitment advertising today. And that's true of programmatic in general. I can think of at least one case I'll share with you, Peter, where during COVID, which made recruiting very difficult, during a lockdown period, particularly for entry-level positions where the government was providing stimulus checks to people to supplant their income, there wasn't a whole lot of motivation for people to go out and get $15, $18 an hour jobs. So if you had a business model dependent upon acquiring that talent during the lockdown, during the pandemic, it made it very, very difficult to do that. And that's where the use of AI actually shined in the process. The ability to find the sources of those talent communities, to engage them, to attract them, and actually get them to not just apply, but to get hired and to show up at the door with no recruiter involvement. And there's a couple organizations you can think of that we support, have worked with, for warehouse workers, shoppers, where the process just got completely automated, no recruiter involvement, and somebody literally could go through the hiring process virtually, show up, get badged, watch a video, and go to work. So when you see that happening at one part of the funnel of talent acquisition, certainly for lower level jobs, the question is, could that be applied to more senior level positions? How far can you go on automating that whole candidate journey, candidate experience, qualification, and hiring without recruiters? In some cases, it's already being done today.
Uh, so, we just talked about the fact that talent acquisition is a human business. And now we've eliminated the human for those lower level positions. You asked the question, can it be applied to more senior level positions? Um, Paint a picture for me. How where could AI help with those more senior level positions? And you've talked about the efficiency of programmatic and the labor savings involved with programmatic, getting the right ads in front of the right people at the right time. But are there other areas of the funnel where it could be effectively applied as well?
Sure. Candidate engagement and qualification, right? So there's conversational AI bots now that are popularized, and AI bots are being used in different portions of not just talent attraction, but even talent management, where within a particular context, those conversations can be pre-programmed and bots can automate those conversations with candidates to help them on their journey to byproduct of qualifying for the employer, but also helping career path the job seeker. One area where that's, I think, extremely important in today's marketplace and world is through diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? The ability to have a conversation with somebody through automation that helps get a diversity candidate through that process, because that's a scary process for a lot of diversity candidates. And diversity recruiting is changing, right? The old days, it was really about meeting compliance for employers, but did we really turn the needle on actually changing the scope and scale of diversity hiring and changing the way the workforce composition? And if that is in fact the goal today, then I think bots can be used as part of the self-nomination process, for example, and gaining comfort with a diversity applicant who in a static form applying for a job would never, raise the hand and self-nominate as a diversity applicant. But a conversational bot can help the process in terms of education. What type of company are we looking at in terms of their diversity initiatives? What support do they have, right, for diversity hires? What are the commitments they've made to diversity? All those kinds of things that can be communicated with an automated engagement that can help deliver the kind of comfort that's required for a diversity applicant to go in on, and self-nominate and say, I want to take advantage of this company's diversity initiative. So that's kind of one area within candidate engagement where I think from a programmatic vendor perspective, we see that and say, well, that's great because you can turn the needle and deliver more data on where these diversity applicants coming from and what are their interests, what kind of questions are they asking, what kind of evidence and commitment do they want to see from an employer that backs up their diversity statement. But from a practicality standpoint, in terms of cost and production and volume, it helps increase conversion rates, right? Because today there's a lot of dropout in the application process because of poor customer journeys and poor candidate journeys. So I think you can help the conversion rate on what that media spend is by having a smart bot that's addressing and guiding and engaging and getting somebody to complete a conversion of an application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Let's go a little bit before that. Obviously, sourcing, as you've just described it, is at the very top of the recruiting funnel. But even before that, you have recruitment marketing, where you're trying to build talent pools. You're trying to connect with prospects before they may be even ready to consider a job move. Any thoughts on how AI might be used there?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions being asked by particularly enterprise employers on where should I be spending my efforts from a omni-channel recruitment perspective, right? So because there's different ways to reach people. You can go after active job seekers with, job sponsorship and promotion on job boards. You can go after passive candidates through social media, display, employer branding initiatives. You can define an ideal candidate profile and do data sourcing within databases and do outbound proactive sourcing. Lots of different ways to solve this problem because candidates are multifaceted from active to passive in nature. So for a large employer, it's like, all right, which of these channels do I bet on? Which one's going to get me the best return? Which one's going to have the largest impact on my budget? And so smart tools that have predictive data, that have the ability to look at somebody's unique job type with the unique employer branding that an employer might bring to the table, and to say, for your jobs in your locations and your employer branding, here's an omni-channel budget that has allocation across the right different sources and mechanisms to go bring back the hiring requirement and meet the hiring requirements that you have. That's a really difficult process. Today, that's all done through trial and error. It's like, I'll give a little budget here, I'll give a little budget there, let me see the results, and let me fine tune it over time. But there are products, PandaLogic's one of them, that has the ability to do predictive analytics in advance, look at your jobs and say, we think for traveling nurses, that incremental cost of acquisition for social media spending is the only way perhaps that you're going to meet your hiring demands, because nurses just aren't going to job boards, and applying to jobs. So you got to find different ways to do it. So that, I think, can help companies significantly, not just on a cost and applicant volume basis, but meeting the unique needs of their particular job types and the types of people they're trying to hire.
So if I understood what you just said, this is a capability that not only helps with the tactics of posting jobs where they're going to have the greatest impact, but the more strategic view of where best to spend your money in an overall campaign. As a solution provider that offers that kind of product, talk about your experiences dealing with employers who, when you raise this topic and you talk about the use of artificial intelligence, as we've heard from a couple of previous sessions in the conference, all of a sudden you've got compliance involved, you've got the legal team involved, and it becomes a much more complicated kind of interaction in order to get past go. So just describe what you're seeing as a solution provider in trying to bring this capability to employers.
Yeah, when you introduce the concept of AI in any element of talent acquisition, there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction. There's a little bit of fear. The fear is related to bias remediation, and bias creation, and the question as to whether or not the use of your algorithms and big data and machine learning introduces any of that bias. And we're kind of fortunate because we're at the top of the funnel, and the top of the funnel is more about source bias than it is candidate bias. In other words, sometimes recruiters think, oh, I've always gotten my candidates from site A, B, C, that's where I'll just keep recruiting. And that kind of bias has led them to wasting money because the market's moved, and those same sources can't deliver as well as perhaps newer ones that they may not even be aware of. So we can eliminate source bias, but a lot of companies want to be ensured that there isn't any human element bias that is going to taint any part of the process in the candidate attraction and candidate delivery portion. And the only way around that we know of is to provide transparency, and to have, there's different kinds of algorithms today. There's supervised algorithms, there's explainable AI, and the more that we can get to explainable AI, where you're able to actually show, how did the algorithms make this particular decision that created this particular result? That's explainable AI, going under the hood of the algorithms and seeing not just from a transparency what data got produced, but how did that data get produced, and what decisionings did the system make on my behalf? Because with machine learning, it's gonna, if it finds out those decisions produce better results, it's going to optimize to that and make it either better or make it worse, right? Depending upon whether it's introduced any portion of those decision makings that aren't optimal. So I think if you asked a lot of AI-based vendors or suppliers in the marketplace for explainable AI, they would have a hard time explaining. And I think that's an initiative that the industry needs to take on to enable people to get a level of comfort as to what's happening, under the hood and how these decisions are being made on their behalf. And it's not an easy thing because a lot of it's done in scale, a lot of it's done in volume, in real time, but you have to give them that level of insight. But where we've started with is just transparency on the data. Where did your spend go individually on budgets and then across jobs? Where did it go in terms of sites? Which sites produced conversion? Which sites produced applicants? And to the extent that I think you give transparency into that data, you're eliminating the fear on behalf of talent acquisition people as to how this system actually works. If it's just a
So,
black box, you just perpetuate the fear, right?
right, right. So do you think that companies need to buy AI-based products differently than they have bought technology-based products in the past? Do you buy a PandoLogic capability with AI and predictive analytics built in differently than you buy an ATS, for example?
Yeah. Well, AI is being introduced within ATSs as well. But yeah, there is this is a problem actually that got addressed by the industry. I don't know if you were at HR Tech a couple years ago. 2 years ago, there were like 165 vendors at HR Tech that announced AI capabilities in their product. I mean, it was the talk of the show. And employers came back from HR Tech going, okay, we got a problem here because the effort to evaluate AI within a product that we may bring into our environment, we're just not equipped to do. They knew that there was both a legal, oversight requirement. There was the need to get under the hood and look at actual data that's being used. That's not typically done in a vendor evaluation. So hrpolicy.org created a recruitment selection committee, and they invited every company that made announcements on AI to participate in their selection process. I think maybe only 50 of those 160 some odd actually submitted, which tells you a lot of it was just press releases, it wasn't really AI. And for the 50 that submitted, they gave out 12 badges. So they took people through and vendors through a buying validation process. And I can tell you, we went through that process and it was rigorous. We thought, it's the process that every employer ought to go through, but very few employers have the resources to do, because this recruitment selection committee represented, 10 or 15 of the largest organizations and their best resources. So PandoLogic got badged twice. We got 2 of the 12 badges, one for ROI and one for adaptability, but we had very smart data scientists going under the hood and forcing us to explain our AI.
So that opens up another question that we often get here at TA Tech, and that is, given the complexity of buying this stuff, and some would argue the sophistication required to use it effectively, are these tools only for enterprise level employers, or do you see a way that SMBs or at least mid-sized businesses can take advantage of the technology?
Yeah. I think it should be for both. The adoption will be, I think, initially enterprise employers, because the cost of producing this kind of product. I'll give you an example. Everybody here drives a car. I don't know if you've ever driven a Tesla, right? But when you went out to buy a new car, and if you bought a car that only had cruise control, and then you went and you sat in a Tesla and it was a self-driving car, it was an immensely different experience. right? Maybe a little scary at first. When you turn those sensors on and it goes into self-driving mode, you take your hand off the wheel, the foot off the brake. It's a little bit of a scary experience at first, but it works. The GPS works. It's, it's more than cruise control. When traffic changes, it changes lanes. It changes GPS, right? It'll take an exit for you and turn on a different road. It's literally self-driving. Now, do I have to be a better driver in order to go through that buying experience? No. So the onus is on the vendors to make AI enablement within talent acquisition products as easy as buying a Tesla. It's a different experience. We should educate to that experience, but you don't have to be any different kind of a driver to sit in a Chevy and use cruise control versus sitting in a Tesla, Model S and letting it drive for yourself. So that's our goal, is to make it so easy, so transparent, such an enjoyable ride that people will adopt this, right?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned transparency, and this is not directly related to our topic, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about it. And that is, that more and more employers are turning to pay for performance advertising, whether it's programmatic or otherwise, because these are days where the fiduciary responsibility of recruiters is really come to the fore. And of course, the challenge is that research shows that over 50% of the clicks in pay for performance advertising are driven by bots. And then you have other ancillary problems where a job seeker doesn't click on a job ad button once, but clicks on it 3 or 4 times, and counting that as 3 or 4 candidate clicks is as unfair as counting a bot click. So what TA Tech did was impanel an international working group that defined as best they could an industry-wide standard for what is a credible click in pay for performance advertising, and then developed a declaration. It's called a Declaration on Traffic Quality, whereby publishers like yourselves and job boards and social media sites and aggregators could tell prospective advertisers, this is how we count clicks, so that we eliminate as best we can bot clicks, and bot clicks are increasingly sophisticated, so it's a continuous battle. And second, this is how we do away with clicks that may not be worthwhile. This multiple click problem that I mentioned are also clicks from people that are living further away. Now, that's less of an issue with remote work, but 2 years ago, it was a big issue. If somebody clicked on a job that was several hundred miles away from where they lived, were they really a legitimate prospective candidate? So the whole idea was to provide this transparency that you're talking about, avoiding the black box and AI, providing some transparency in pay for performance advertising. And that's a free template open to all employers. It's available at tatech.org. And we're hoping that more and more publishers, job boards, social media sites, aggregators will take advantage of it. I know PandoLogic has, and we're very appreciative of that.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of being in a association like TA Tech, is taking advantage, not just participating in defining these standards, but taking advantage of them. And I know we directly benefited from that initiative because it's core to performance, right? And eliminating fraud and validating clicks. And I will also say, Peter, just to your point about the world moving to pay for performance, there's still a lot of job boards that are pay to post, and for legitimate reasons, right? It's their business model. It's the model they've operated under. They're comfortable with that model, and they may never move. I think it's important they understand that there's still a play for them in the programmatic world. Programmatic doesn't mean always pay for performance. Now, we'd prefer it to mean that, but take Craigslist as an example. $700 million job posting, pay to post business. We programmatically work now with Craigslist, and the only way we make that pay to post model work within a performance based delivery system where clients are just paying us on clicks and apps is through the use of AI. The ability to know when and where Craigslist posting will compete with a ZipRecruiter or an Indeed sponsored job on a CPC basis. So if you have systems that are smart enough, they can run jobs through and build a big database of predictive performance. So I know for a particular job type, whether Craigslist ought to be a pay to post portion of my recruitment spend, and to know that the result's going to be competitive with other sites on a CPC and CPA basis. We'd love to have that kind of relationship with lots of different job boards that are pay to post, that are kind of afraid of putting, their toe in the programmatic waters and are afraid of cannibalization. There's a way for them to participate with their current model if they have a vendor that is intelligent enough and is using AI to convert their performance into the performance requirements to compete in that market.
Okay, so we were talking earlier about the bias issue, and we've had a question come in. Let me read it for you and get your reaction. Intentional discrimination is currently illegal when it can be proven. At what point in the future do you think the government may hold a company accountable for accidental automated discrimination? How might that be enforced?
Boy, that's a tough question. And I'm not comfortable answering for the government, but I will say this, the use of those two terms you had together in that sentence, accidental automation, I don't think there's anything accidental about the way automation occurs. So if it's happening accidentally and it's an automated process, there's something wrong. And this goes back to explainable AI. The algorithms are operating inappropriately in order to replicate that problem. So it may not be as accidental as you might want to call it. But I think employers, whether it's the government or just servicing their market, they need to be responsible for the way in which they are attracting and employing and hiring candidates. So they need systems that, have that level of transparency again, to where if they get an unintended consequence or result, they're able to figure out why and fix it. Because once you build it into automation, it's just going to continue to replicate.
And I think, as Jerry Allenby pointed out in our last session, the government is already holding employers accountable. The fact that it's automated doesn't make any difference to them. They're looking at outcomes. And if the outcome is discrimination, it's going to be a penalty.
Yeah.
So here's another question. What do you think is the hardest task that artificial intelligence is going to be asked to handle for talent acquisition?
I can tell you the hardest task our clients face initially is the budgeting process. And we talked about one scenario where, which omni-channel process do I use to get the right talent? And then the question is, how much does that cost and how much of my budget should I be applying to that? And again, it is advertising. So the whole goal is eliminate waste in the advertising and increase conversion rates and yield. So the biggest problem is helping clients come up with what is an optimized budget. And for many products, that is a trial and error process. And they're just replicating that waste. It's manual A/B testing. Let me run this campaign for a month, look at the results, I'll tweak it, and we'll run it again. And it's a constant manual A/B testing effort. That's not AI. That's not machine learning. That's not smart algorithms. If you have AI is only as good as the data in which it uses. And so what you need is data that prior to running a campaign will predict what the optimal results ought to be. So it's that prediction component that we find enables our clients to derive a level of comfort before they ever even launch a campaign. So we can give them, again, transparency of data on a prediction model for their unique jobs in their markets as to what the optimal budget ought to be. Once you've done that, then you're committed. You gotta deliver to that prediction, right? And you got to manage that campaign to that prediction level. But if you do it right, the machine just gets smarter. And every time you run that campaign, there's no manual A/B testing. There's machine learning that is taking that data model. It's figuring out what changed from the last time I ran this. Was competition changed? Did supply and demand change? What were those changes that I can then understand and incorporate into my data model, re-predict what the results will be going forward, and then get validation of that budget. And that's immensely valuable for employers because everybody goes through seasonality of hiring, right? Whether you're retail and it's back to school hiring, or you're a software development company and you got projects that need to be done, you're going to do some cyclical hiring. To be able to do that in a predictive model where you may not necessarily have the time to do the manual A/B testing to optimize, your hiring cycle's done before you can get that optimization done on a manual basis. So budgeting is a great use case for AI. And I would encourage companies that are doing any amount of media spend for recruitment advertising to get a prediction in advance and require transparency on that prediction. How did my budget get spread? Where did it get deployed? What sources do you think are going to contribute? What's going to be the yield? Are any jobs going to get left behind, right? Not funded with the budget I'm applying to this. Those are questions you want to have answered in advance, because if you don't, you're just going to waste money.
Okay, so let me ask you, we're coming to the end of our time, but let me ask you to peer into your crystal ball and tell us where you think AI will next, what tasks AI will next take on in talent acquisition. You mentioned earlier that you had a conversation with 10 Guy, the interviewing AI-based robot, at a previous TA Tech conference.
I didn't get the job, by the way, during that.
Right. There's been other research that shows that hiring managers are only 2% better than flipping a coin when it comes to picking the best candidate for a position. They get it right 52% of the time. So maybe decision support systems for candidate selection. Where might the technology next go?
Yeah, well, I'll give you my sense. AI is being applied to almost every step of the talent acquisition and talent management process, but it's not being done in a uniform fashion. So we're utilizing it for programmatic. But once a candidate is in the interview process, is AI being used effectively in the interview process? Is AI being used effectively in the offer process, in the onboarding process? All of these are areas where AI is being introduced and being validated and being adopted, but none of it's tied together. I would really love to know, in the interview process, the offer process, the onboarding process, was a candidate that came through my programmatic AI system engaged in that? And if so, at what level? So I'd love signals back from downflow of the tech stack, the funnel, that will help improve my AI. So once we start connecting all of these AI constructs throughout the entire process, it's going to require deeper integration of products, amongst vendors. We need to be fully integrated into the applicant tracking flow process and then into the talent management process, because the signals relative to candidates we initially delivered and how they performed are important for me to understand to make my spend optimized going forward. So very little of that exists today. A lot of the AI, value proposition you hear from vendors is, we're going to solve your problem from A to Z. We're going to the entire recruiting process through our platform. They're always going to be best of breed point products that maybe do AI better for a particular function. So wouldn't it be nice if these systems talk together, and the AI that was being delivered that was making the interview process so much more optimal was delivering data at the top of the funnel as well as to the bottom of the funnel. Those are kind of the initiatives that we're working on in partner development, and kind of bridging AI across all of these various different areas of adoption.
Okay. Well, Terry, first, thank you again for leaping into the fray here at the last minute. It's been a thought-provoking discussion. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope our attendees have as well. Any final thoughts before we go to intermission?
No, again, I just, it'd be fun to talk to Tom at some day and just figure out how was this discussion relative to the one he envisioned, right? It would be fun to have a recap with him. And again, my thoughts and prayers go out to him for a speedy recovery.
Well, and he is overseeing the application of artificial intelligence into the warfighting mission of special operations. So I hope that someday we can have Tom come back and talk a little bit about that as well.
That'd be
So
great.
Terry, thank you
Peter,
very much. Best of wishes to you and to your team there at Pando
take care.
Logic. You bet.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.